Welcome to the Transform Childhood Trauma Summit. We're here today with Amy Lloyd from Ascension Wellness. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you for having me, Jamie.
Oh, my pleasure. Amy, I'd like to concentrate today on identity and really kind of how childhood trauma affects our identity as we grow older. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you interested and passionate about helping people who have experienced trauma in their lives.
I came at it accidentally, I guess, through personal experience, through my own journey. I always knew that I wanted to help people somehow, but I never knew exactly what does that mean? What is that going to look like? I had a vision when I was a little kid, and I knew that I'm going to be a therapist, but not a therapist. And I was really curious, like just like on the edge of my seat with curiosity, what does that mean? But I had no idea. I just knew that I'll know what I need to know when the time is right.
Right.
So jump ahead many years, various jobs, raising kids, running a different business. And I decided one day, well, I was working at the time as a personal assistant doing helping clients with whatever they needed. And different clients started referring to me as their life coach. I'm like, whoa, I don't even know what that means. So, but it was interesting that more than one of them was calling me that. So I'm like, well, if I'm gonna be called that, maybe I should figure out what that means. What am I doing? And I looked into it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I think this might be my thing. And so I became trained, and I'm like, this is the therapist, but not a therapist. It's in that direction, but distinctly different, right? And so, and I learned why they were calling me their life coach. That's essentially what I was doing without knowing it. So that's where I started in this industry. But in my personal life, at that same time, I experienced some pretty major trauma when my mom disowned me. And of course, with an event like that, that wasn't the first trauma. That was just kind of the exclamation mark. Up until that point, there was a lifetime of stuff before that that I never knew was trauma. It was just like, well, that's life, right? We all have stuff. We all have hard things that we have to go through or whatever. That's just life. And I didn't think too much of it. And when that happened, though, it's like, okay, that stopped me in my tracks. That had me researching how is it even possible for a parent to disown their child? What does that mean for me? I mean, we're going to be talking about identity. I that threw me right into a major identity crisis. Like, who am I without a parent? Um, what do I, how do I remake myself from here? What got me here? How can I take responsibility, or what parts of that can I take responsibility for that? Not taking responsibility for her side, but I recognized that I was in a relationship that was very toxic for a long time. And as a child, that's one thing, right? But as an adult, we have increasing opportunities to choose differently, including very difficult decisions. And so, what part of this is my responsibility and how do I heal through this? So it just had me asking all of those sorts of questions. And really, that's a long-winded way of saying I Googled a million different ways, a million different versions of the question, what's wrong with me? Why am I experiencing what I'm experiencing? And how in the world do I just make it stop? And so that landed me into the realm of trauma. And words like trauma and abuse never resonated with me because, yeah, I had a hard life, but I mean, everybody has stuff, right? And some of us have more stuff than other stuff, but whatever, that's just life. So as I started unraveling this and learning more and more and more, like, oh my gosh, my clients need this. Every client I was working with, as I learned about my own trauma, I was seeing trauma wounds in them. And so I started sharing just little bits of what I was learning, and it was resonating. And they were having the same sort of epiphanies that I had first had when I first learned about trauma. So the universe has a way of sending me clients who are aligned a lot of times in very similar experiences of me, of mine. And so I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs from day one and a lot of different types of business owners, not only coaches. And even way back then, that was in 2016, I was talking to people about trauma. So at some point, as I was learning more and more about it, I was also learning how maybe fragile those sort of conversations can be. And I really needed to know what I was doing so I could continue safely. So I went on to find appropriate training and certification. And I mean, frankly, at this point, I'm a little bit addicted to all of the training and CEs. I love this stuff. Anything having to do with trauma, business, or marketing, and I'm all in.
Well, I mean, we kind of get that way. Just growing because I got it really, I don't say addicted, passionate about
Yes.
self-development books. And for 30 years now, I've read them and read them. But the one thing I've learned, Amy, is that a typical self-development book, if you've experienced childhood trauma and it's not coming through a trauma lens, can affect you in an adverse way.
Yeah.
So that's why I become passionate about learning about childhood trauma and how I can get myself to a different place. And it is really about growing in your mind and really kind of believing in yourself. And so that's my first question, Amy, can be that I I think in this world that more and more people need to become entrepreneurs because we don't know what's going to happen, and you need kind of control of your finances and your life. I think more than ever. So if I come out of childhood trauma and with someone that says, "Well, I'm really not worthy to do this. If if I fail, then I'll have shame, and you can't go anywhere unless you fail, right? So you have obstacles within your mind about how you're going to get there. So if I come to you and I say, Amy, I would like to be an entrepreneur, but I have these concerns that I have that I realize now is coming from childhood trauma. What is the first step you do to kind of help me get started?
Yeah. First, I have some version of that conversation with pretty much every client, especially the entrepreneurs, right? But really every client, because we all have goals and most of us have that obstacle course in our mind. I actually refer to that as the trauma obstacle course because, okay, here I am, here's my goal. But for some people, it's more of a straightforward shot. You just go through the steps of, education or whatever it is, gaining skills so that you can get the job or start the business or whatever the thing is. But for others of us, we have this whole trauma obstacle course in our heads that make that goal feel unattainable. And not only unattainable, but you mentioned shame. It feels like, okay, even if I do get it, I don't deserve it. Somebody else can do it better. Um, That toxic shame is an interesting one. So first we have the healthy emotion of shame, which I have a friend who says that's an oxymoron. Shame is not healthy. She said your shame is different than my shame. And what I say though is there's no such thing as a bad emotion. It can feel rotten inside, but the emotion itself is information. Every distinct emotion exists to deliver certain types of information. So healthy shame brings us the message of, oops, I made a mistake. How can I make it right? Do I need to apologize to someone? Do I need to fix something I broke? What do I need to do? Do I need to just back up and get out of the way? Or, what is it? Toxic shame is a little different. Toxic shame takes that emotion of healthy shame and it overlays this false belief system. And now the translation becomes, I am the mistake.
Right.
That robs us of all of our power. It's crippling. There's absolutely nothing we can do or achieve as long as we believe that I am a mistake, I am unlovable, I am unworthy, I don't have value. And there's no price tag big enough or small enough that we can put on that. And so when we're talking about becoming entrepreneurs, I mean, there are a lot of stages in starting a business. One of the many stages that can cripple us is when it comes to pricing our first products or services.
Yeah.
How do you put a price on it? Because we feel like we're putting a price on our own value. And that's a hard one. So part of what it is a cognitive understanding of all of that, of why we have our own trauma obstacle course. And it's going to be a little bit different for each person. We're all going to have our own specific maze in our head, so to speak. And so that is, to use more metaphor, I speak a lot in metaphor. That is our trauma recipe. And that trauma recipe needs a matching healing recipe. And, we're all familiar with the how difficult it can be sometimes to dial in like medication, say for seizures or diabetes or depression. We've all either experienced or at least heard stories of people struggling to dial in the right medication, the right type, the right dosage to address the symptoms, right? Dialing in the healing recipe is similar, but because there's so many different healing modalities and healing tools and resources. So what do we use? How do we know what to choose? And it can be really overwhelming when we find ourselves intentionally on our healing journey and you go researching how to heal and it's just going to be bombardment of information. So one of the places to start is to just stop and breathe. That's one. Another one is understanding what trauma is, because it's actually very different than what most people realize. So once we start understanding exactly what trauma is and the full implications of that in a general sense, but also specifically in our own story, then we start finding ways to dial in our own personal healing recipe so that we are moving with intentional steps in our own direction.
Right. Well, you know, I really think that becoming an entrepreneur, and I'm so happy that I've done it in my life, and it's taken me a while to get there. But you isolate sometimes entrepreneurship can be isolating, and then all of a sudden now all of these thoughts start going through your head, right? Of while you're isolating yourself. And one of the things that I read a little on in one of your blogs was social anxiety, and then how do you overcome social anxiety with all the things that are going in your mind? And if you think about becoming an entrepreneur, you have to tell people, right, that I'm doing this, and it's a great product and it can help you do this. But if you become somebody that doesn't like to socialize, that all of a sudden now you're in isolation, how do you keep them from planning, right? If I plan today, I don't have to go out and talk to anybody, but I'm actually working, right? Unless,
Yeah.
and really, unless you're trying, if you're an entrepreneur, unless you're trying to help people buy your product, you're not really working, right? And that's the false belief that a lot of people, I think, especially with who have experienced trauma, work, work, work. But did they really work? Not really.
Right.
So they're setting themselves up for failure. How do you
Mhm.
help them overcome that obstacle, Amy?
Yeah, that's a really great example. And I think that that isolation, especially in the context of the example you gave, it also is reminding me of workaholism. Many entrepreneurs have told me, well, that's just what it means to be an entrepreneur. And I'm like, doesn't have to mean that. It could mean something else. Let's talk about what that something else might look like. And so you're right. It's so easy for anyone, but especially entrepreneurs, to use our work to as a shield. It can become our protective cocoon. And I know people who are on paper enormously successful in their business, but live that life of isolation. And, in the wee hours of the morning, they're really struggling. They're in a lot of pain. They're very isolated, very alone, and struggling with a lot of things that their public persona would never have you guessing that they're struggling with. And so it's a matter first, again, of understanding, of them understanding the dynamics of what is happening and more importantly, maybe why it's happening. Again, what is this thing called trauma and how is it applied to me and my situation? How did it lead to me running my business this way? How did it lead to me using my business as a shield or using anything as a shield or needing to isolate in the first place? And I want to offer a little bit of um, I want to flesh that out just a little bit. That need to isolate. For anyone who ever experiences that, it's okay. It's okay. I want to bring a new lens to that because culturally, we are shamed when we feel that need to isolate, when we feel the need to drink or to work or to do anything that might be deemed unhealthy, right? So I want to take that shame away and help people understand that the reason we feel we need those things is because our needs are actually not being met. We are not taught what all of our needs are. And so we can't possibly meet them. And not only that, not only are we not taught what all of them are, but we're actually taught that certain of our needs are bad to meet. For example, before we started recording, you were talking just a little bit about like spirituality. And many of us are taught that to believe or to not believe a certain way is right or wrong. And so then if we find ourselves on the wrong side of that line, well, then we can't meet that need. And we all live in a very, well, in the Western world, we live in a very secular society, right? And so religion, spirituality is tolerated to an extent, but really we're primarily secular. And so if we start talking too woo-woo or too religious or anything like that, then the shame starts coming because it's like, you're kind of getting out of line, you're getting a little too weird for me or whatever. And so we're not able to meet those needs. Um, Having that sense of awe, that relationship with some sort of higher power, whatever that looks like for you, is actually a biological human need, for example. So is human connection. We all know that we're social animals, but really we're kind of taught that that's not a need. It's just this thing that humans do. But whatever, go hug your dog, your emotional support animal, and call it good and get back to work and be productive, right? That's the society we live in.
Right.
So it's really easy to shame ourselves when we feel the need to isolate or to drink or to do all of these things that we know are not healthy. But it is only because our actual needs are not being met. So then our body is saying, well, when I do this thing, it actually alleviates some of the pressure. So then we'd want to do that thing even more.
Yeah, and you can get, like drinking, it can ease your tension at the moment, but it's really depressive. So
Exactly.
you drink and then you become depressed and it becomes that circle that you're trying to get undepressed and and you just end up drinking and drinking and drinking. And I just feel that, so many times, I mean, I isolated myself for 10 years, just, and I would, people would say, "Jimmy, do you want to do this?" And I would say, "No, I'm tired. I'm going to work. I'm going to do something." And so I isolated myself for 10 years. But it wasn't a bad thing. I mean, God always does something for you. And that was the time I really grew. I grew a lot. But, when we do entrepreneurship, isolation can be one thing. But then, I mean, and I'll ask you this, I mean, a lot of us have uh, relationship with money concerns.
Oh yeah.
And now you become an entrepreneur, and it is, it is about selling your product, obviously, and helping people. But then you get all of this money, or you don't make any money, and you get shame about that. But if you were somebody that all of a sudden you started making a lot of money and you started spending it, and maybe even spending it where it shouldn't be spent, how do you help people become, I guess, really a good steward with money, or you build a relationship with money so that you're not ashamed to ask people for a fair amount, right? I mean, I know when I had a business once, and I would say, "Oh, it's this much," and they would say, "Oh, I'll pay this much." I would really lose money if I gave them that much, but sometimes I'd say, "Okay, just I helped them, which made me feel good. I lost money, which made me didn't feel good, but I would say, okay, well, I'm gonna make it up on the next one." So how do you help people with that?
I work with a lot of people on that. One of the things I do is train new trauma recovery coaches. And so that relationship with money is a common conversation as people are trying to figure out how to price themselves because they want to make sure in that industry, they want to make sure that their clients can afford them.
Right.
And so that can get a little tricky. But that relationship with money is first, it's about disidentifying who we are from the price of our products or services. So I'm not selling myself per se. I am in my job as a coach and as an instructor, I am selling access to me, but that has nothing to do with my value as an individual. It's the value of this service that I have created, which is different than my value as an individual, which is priceless. You can't put a price tag on that. So it's working through those nuances first, and then also putting ourselves in our clients' shoes. If most of us, especially in the beginning of our businesses, and this might vary, of course, across industries, but especially in some sort of helping industry, who our ideal client is quite often some past version of ourselves. And that could be true in other industries. I've known it to be true in real estate and restaurant work and in many different industries. Whoever the person, the entrepreneur says their ideal client is usually some past version of themselves. So it's almost like we're using our business to help ourselves in ways that we needed but didn't have access to when we needed it. And so, how can we look at it through that lens and understand that maybe what we needed back then was exactly what we're offering now? Maybe it was something a little bit different, but really unmarrying the dollar from that, the currency exchange from that. And also, so you mentioned negotiating the price and not in your favor. And I think that most new entrepreneurs and many well-seasoned entrepreneurs have made that same mistakes more time than any of us would like to admit. And that can be a painful lesson to learn again and again and again. And it's interesting. I remember the first time I went into a client's, I was decades ago, I owned a housekeeping company. That was my very first business. And I went into a client's house telling myself over and over and over, I'm not going to lower my price. I'm not going to lower my price. I'm not going to lower my price. And I gave them the quote and they didn't blink an eye. And I'm like, wait, what? Did that just happen? And a few months after working for them, they said, Amy, your work is incredible. You need to raise your rates. You're not charging enough. I'm like, wow, what in the world? So I started raising my rates. And guess what? Nobody blinked an eye. And some eventually I ran into people who did, but they just weren't my client, right? And so it's learning. I teach conscious business and I teach trauma informed marketing. And so it's learning how to bring all of the pieces together of, yes, let's look at this as a business. We have to stay in the black and preferably with a nice cushion there, right? We have to meet all of the business needs. We have to meet all of my paycheck needs. Any staff, if a business has staff, and also we have to meet the human side of that, of showing up for our clients in whatever way our business does that, but also in showing up for ourselves. We can't forget that we are a part of our own business. If we are going to use phrases like the client or the customer is always right, the customer always comes first, it has to start with us. That's a lesson I learned years ago as a single mom because I realized one day, what happens to my kids if something happens to me? So in order, if I want to put my kids first, I have to put me first. And the same goes for our companies. So if I want to put my customers first, then I have to put myself first. If I want to put my staff first, I have to put myself first. And then it grows from there. And another phrase that I use a lot is we have to be our own first client. Now, that is specifically in the helping industry. That's not going to be relevant necessarily for in real estate or restaurants or something like that. But as coaches, or anyone in any helping professional, we need to be our own first client. But to translate that across industries, what that means is we need to look in the mirror and see and be honest with what we see there. Where are our pain points? What are our unmet needs? And how can we go meet them? Because it's only when we do that, when we continue putting ourselves first in that way, that we are then putting our staff first, our customers first, and so on.
Right. And and I think that becoming an entrepreneur, like if you go to work for somebody else and you can be an overachiever and you can get, go high up in the corporation and do well, but in your own business, right? Now and you're a people pleaser and you need to set boundaries. When you have your own business, people will call you at 10 o'clock in the night and especially in today's society, right? And they expect you to answer the phone or they expect you to get back to them. And if you're a people pleaser, right, to set that boundary of like, when I did some kitchen and bath designs and I would put in my agreement, I do not return phone calls after 8 at night because people would just, they would always want you to help them anytime they wanted it to be helped. So setting boundaries, people pleasing is a hard thing for people who have experienced childhood trauma to deal with. How do you recommend people kind of take that and say, well, you're here to help them, but you're not here to please them
Right.
unless it helps you get to the whatever your goal is with what you're helping them with. And then you have to set boundaries, right? And we're all not, I'm still working on that myself, is how do you set boundaries so that you're not a people pleaser, but you don't set such a tight boundary that they say, well, he's got so many boundaries. I don't even know how he helps people. So, that feeling of everything is good for your client because you're not a people pleaser and you have the right boundaries.
Yeah. I love boundary work. And it took me a long time to be able to say that because it can be hard. It can be challenging, more so for some than others. It was really hard for me personally. So in conscious business, it's all about starting with your own nervous system and learning, well, first of all, what that means. What, like I said, what is trauma? What is abuse? Not everybody has necessarily experienced overt abuse. I think that probably all of us have experienced at least covert abuse, um, um, socially sanctioned. Anyway, in conscious business, it's about really recognizing what are my needs, how am I going to meet those needs, including boundaries. So a boundary lies where I really feel that I am being supported by myself, by the situation, whatever it is, by the structure of the company, by the relationship with the client. Um, Personally, I have a boundary that I'm not going to be yelled at. And so we can talk about anything. I am really good at having hard conversations, but we can talk it out. And if we need to take a breather, that's fine. We can take a breather, but we're not going to yell at one another. That's the deal, right? And so just knowing things like that about yourself. And so one thing that a lot of people, that probably few people realize, is that anger is the emotion that lets us know when our boundaries are either being crossed or being threatened. So when you find yourself feeling angry in any flavor, that means low level irritation, low level frustration, crankiness. That's all anger. So that's your system telling you there's a boundary being bumped up against somehow. So when you feel that, just pause and be like, okay, what's the boundary? What's going on here? And that will help you learn how to recognize and set better boundaries and maintain them. This is also making me think of a training that I was once in, trauma training specifically, and the lady had a picture of an ink blot on the screen and said, "This is your trauma. If you try to heal all of this all at once, you will re-traumatize yourself, and it makes the whole situation worse. It makes the wound bigger." And she said, "So how do you heal your trauma?" And she went to the next slide. It had the ink blot, but a piece had broken off and bubbled up to the surface. And she said, "You heal your trauma the same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time." And I said, "Okay, that's a great analogy. But what does that translate to in real life? How do I know what the one bite is?" And she said, "It's the thing in your face." So our business serves as a mirror in many, many ways, because every business owner knows at any given moment we can have a few different things in our face causing us stress. So when we start looking at those things and really digging in, and more specifically, looking inside ourselves and really digging into our reactions to those things in our face, that's where we're going to find our trauma wounds. And also, a lot of those boundaries are going to be, especially when we talk about people pleasers, we're going to find a lot of overridden boundaries. So just understanding all of those dynamics and really recognizing that anger is your key to understanding what boundaries you have that you might not be honoring, that you don't even know that you're dismissing or allowing others to dismiss.
Right. Well, I mean, especially with anger, for me, sometimes I just get a little bit irritated and I tell myself I am love, but then all of a sudden I can get irritated by something a little bit. But, and you were kind of revealing to me that, hey, there's a need that's not being met.
Right.
And the one thing that I think that we get through with childhood trauma is that we don't sometimes know what our needs are, right? We always, we kind of went through life as how do I stay safe? And then how do I not upset somebody in the household there in this day, right? So who you are and kind of, knowing what makes anger at for you is can be that's why people like yourself. I mean, I'm here to tell as many people as I can to get help because you this is something that you can't really do on your own. You can read a book, right? And you can study, but unless you have that human connection and it's really somebody that's loving you, right? And not going to judge you. And if you get a little small win, they give you a high five and say, that's a great job, where other coaches would not do that. And so, Amy, I want to do one more thing. Well, we've kind of covered the money, we've covered relationships. Now, how do I become the confident person that will go out and take a risk of becoming becoming an entrepreneur? Because and so many times, and it was for me that, oh my gosh, what is somebody going to say if I fail? And at that time, I hadn't learned that, Napoleon Hill says, for every adversity, there's an equal or greater benefit. So you learn from your mistakes. And there's never been a successful person that hasn't made a mistake. And if you find out most who are really, really rich, they filed for bankruptcy a couple times, right? Because they had enough security in themselves to take the risk. And if somebody said something to them about it, it really didn't bother them. But, again, us people with childhood trauma, we're so afraid that somebody's going to say bad things about us or condemn us for what we've just done. So, how do you get people to get the self confidence they can to say, well, I'm going to do this because I want to live the life that I love and that I want to have, rather than keeping where I am and just making sure that nobody says anything bad about me or that I've failed?
Right. Well, I am reminded that Thomas Edison said, I never failed on making a light bulb. I just learned 10,000 ways how not to make a light bulb.
Exactly.
So we could maybe start with some reframing. And that reminds me of there are certain qualities that we all have that sometimes we don't necessarily feel like we have a whole lot of access to. But when we can gain increasing access to these qualities, our confidence goes up. Some of those qualities, I cannot remember all of them off the top of my head. Some of them are curiosity,
Mhm.
compassion, whether we're talking about compassion for others or compassion for ourselves. Start at the easiest place. Playfulness, perspective, clarity. Um, I knew I wouldn't be able to think of them all. But for anyone watching, if you go Google the eight P, no, yeah, the eight C's and the five P's of IFS, then you'll find the all of these C and P words I'm coming up with, and confidence is one of them. So the more access we can get to any of those qualities, the more confident we're going to feel. Because what that is doing is helping us bypass all of these things in our face. And it's helping us kind of get rid of the clutter, the internal clutter. It's helping us turn down those internal voices that are back there chattering away and telling us that we're going to mess up, we're going to be judged, we're not going to get it right. Who do you think you are? It turns down the volume on all of that stuff. And it helps us gain access to just internal peace. In the beginning, we can still hear those voices, but we also have more access to internal peace at the same time. So it gives us capacity, it gives us more internal space. And all of that, the more we do that, the more we can access any of those C and P words, the more things just feel a little easier, a little lighter. And the more we practice it, it just grows from there.
Well, I think that if we don't if we don't experience things, right, you can't grow unless you experience things. And until you have the confidence to experience something, then, if you want to ride a bike, right, you have to learn to ride a bike in order
Right.
to say that I've done it. So you
Mhm.
just have to be able to, be the person that can be confident that you can, even if you make a mistake, that's okay. And I think sometimes with the childhood trauma, that's some of our biggest things is that
Yeah.
we're so afraid that we're going to make a mistake and somebody else is going to say, "Oh my gosh, I told you you couldn't do that anyway," right? And all of a
Right.
sudden now you're right back in your childhood trauma days.
Right.
But Amy, I really want to encourage people to reach out to people like Amy and trauma coaches, because you have to, not only do you have to address the mind, but you have to address what comes in your body. And really it's a trauma coach that can address those things for you and get you to become that person that you want to be. So if you can say one more thing, Amy, that can say, "Oh, we've talked about these three things, but I want to share this with you," what would that be?
You're worth it. And I really want people to understand that we are all more powerful than we realize. And many of us can fear that power. And that fear can keep us playing small because that's what we've been taught. And I really, for all of the rebels out there, I really want to celebrate rebelliousness because that is your spirit speaking up. Going back to those eight C's and five P's, that is your spirit speaking up and saying, something's not right. And I know that we can do this. So to echo what you said, Jamie, keep your eye on the goal because you can do it and you're worth it.
Right. And the one thing that we're taught, and you mentioned rebel, and I think I'm almost becoming a little rebel, but you're not so much a rebel as you got trapped in the conformity that you were taught through church
Exactly.
and through school and through just normal life. You're supposed to do this, and you lose your imagination, you lose a lot of things by the way that the world teaches you that you're supposed to be. And I think that if we can create rebels, right, that says, I'm going to do this, and I'm not so concerned about what conformity means to me, but I'm going to make my life and my family and my time here worth it. So, Amy, thank you so much. Let us know how we can get a hold of you, or somebody can get a hold of you if they connected with you and say, Amy, how can you help me with what concern I'm having?
Absolutely. People can reach out directly via email, amy at ascensionwellnesslife.com. They can also visit my website, ascensionwellnesslife.com, and feel free to book a free discovery call. It's an opportunity for us to have a half hour to just chat, to learn a little bit more about what I do, how I support people, what I support them with, and to learn a little bit more about them and make sure that we're the right fit and what the options are.
Great. Well, I think we've only been talking for about 30, 45 minutes, and I've learned a lot talking to you. So I think, I want to recommend people reach out to you and become the person that can do what they want, and you're going to help them with their identity. So thank you so, so much, Amy. It was such a pleasure having you here on the Transform Childhood Trauma Summit, and we'll be talking soon.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.